I found this Troy Bilt backpack blower put out by the curb as trash, and I fixed it by replacing the pull cord, the fuel lines, rebuilding the carburetor, and also rigging up a temporary air filter. The model number for this blower is TB4BP, and the date of manufacture, June of 2010. There's only one fuel line, there should be two. It's missing a pull cord and the cover on the air filter housing, that's missing. This blower has a 4-stroke engine, so it does not run off 2-cycle mix. You don't have to mix oil with the fuel. It takes raw gas. Let's make sure there's some oil in it. It's nasty, it's dirty, but there is oil. To get this cover off the back, 7 screws, and they are T25 Torx. What did I miss? There's one more way under here. On the recoil assembly, that's all the rope there is. But the assembly itself, it will hold tension. I had this handle and pull cord on hand, also this nylon rope, and this, I think this is too thick. I'll probably use some of this white cord. To get the new cord on here, I'm going to have to tie a knot on the back side, kind of on the underside of this spool, so this spool has to come off. And hopefully when I take this off, the metal band that's underneath, I hope that stays in place. And yes, it did stay in place, so that's awesome. And as far as thickness goes, the rope on this handle is thicker, and the white nylon cord looks to be about the same size. I think this is the better choice. I'm going to cut that knot off, take a lighter and heat up the tip so that it won't come unfrayed. And now I need to work that cord through the hole. Grab it with the needle nose pliers and pull it through. Tie a knot on the back side, pull that knot tight. Not knowing how much cord I need, I'm going to wrap the cord around the spool and then mark the line and cut it off. So when I pull this way, it's going to recoil that way. So the rope needs to be wound in this direction, counterclockwise. And then I'll go a little bit farther to allow for the handle. And I'll melt that as well. And pull that rope back off, feed it through this hole, and put this spool back on top. Turn it counterclockwise a little bit just to make sure it's in the right spot, that it's going to build tension. And yes, it is. Put that washer back in and the screw. Let's make sure I don't have that too tight. Nope, that spins freely. Now what I have to do is work that cord around to the slot that's cut in the plastic and pull the cord into that slot, and then use that slot as an anchor point so that I can turn the spool counterclockwise. We'll go 3 revolutions. That's 1, 2, 3. Each revolution is building tension on the spring. Now let me pull this through. I'm pressing down on that spool to hold the tension. Trying to get to that mark that I put on the rope, and I'm close. I'm right there. Alright, I'm going to go with that. I'm going to tie the handle on right here, which means fishing the line up through the handle. I'm going to tie a double knot this time just to make sure it doesn't slip back through the handle. Cut off the excess, and one more time melt the end, and I'm also going to melt the knot a little bit to hold that in place. So be careful if you're doing this. Don't touch the plastic when it's that hot, because it will stick to your fingers. So when I let this go, it should be pulled inside the handle, and we're good. That's plenty of tension. Now we can put that cover back on with the pull cord assembly, but be careful with the screws. There are 4 of each type. 4 machine screws, those go in the middle, these go into metal. The ones with the coarser thread, which are the 2 on top and the 2 down below, they go into plastic. And while we have access to it, let's check out the plug. And that's the wrong size. Hang on. I'll get this cleaned up with carb spray and sandpaper. Got it cleaned up. I'm honestly not sure what the gap should be, so I'm just going to leave it like it is. Once I get the screws back in, we'll put some starting fluid in the carburetor and see if it'll fire up just for a second. And if it does, then we'll get to work on the fuel lines. Alright, here goes nothing. Think we got us a good blower. Just got to get the fuel lines on. Looking down in the fuel tank, you can see a piece of an old fuel line, and there's also old fuel down there, so I need to dump all of that out. And fuel's pretty clean. I don't see any dirt or water in it. Now, as far as what size fuel line I need, I do not know, but I bought a kit about a month ago. It has 4 different sizes in it, 3 feet of each, I believe. It was about $7. I'll put a link down below to that kit, and hopefully one of these sizes is the correct size. So we can start by getting this line off. I'm just going to cut that. And down in the tank, there's a filter on the other end, so I can't just pull it out. I'm going to cut this also. I can reuse this filter. Which one looks right? This one looks like a match to me. Now, the 2 connections on the carburetor, the one closest to the bulb, that is for the fuel supply, and this one farther away, that is for the return. I'm going to get the line started on the return first. And that is on very tight. Now where it enters the tank, it only needs to go into the tank about 1 inch. It doesn't need to go all the way down to the bottom like the supply line will. And I'm going to cut this line off at an angle, and with that point, it'll be easier to feed it through the hole. I can see that line sticking through probably about 1.5 inches, so that should be good. Now for the fuel supply line, since I already have a point on this tip, I'm going to use that and stick it down through the hole. Now this one I'm going to need to grab and pull through the mouth of the tank, so I have a coat hanger with a hook bent down at the end, and I'm going to grab that line, see if I can get it with my needle nose, and push it down through the hole and pull at the same time. I'm going to cut this off square. Put the fuel filter on. With the weight on the bottom of the filter, it should drop down to the bottom of the tank, and it does. That's good. And now the only thing left to do is cut it off and attach it to the carburetor. That looks about right here. I think we're good. Let's put some fuel in it, put the cap on it, prime it up, and see if it'll run. I have some raw gas in it, non-ethanol raw gas, because remember, this is a 4-stroke engine, so it does not need 2-cycle fuel. When I press the primer bulb, we can see fuel moving through the fuel lines, going out through the return and in through the supply lines, so we know the carburetor is getting gas. If it does not start like this without starting fluid, then we probably have an issue with the carburetor, and we'll know that for sure if I then put starting fluid in it and it fires up for a second. If that happens, we're going to have to take the carburetor off, see what's wrong with that. Probably a dried out diaphragm within the carburetor. The kill switch is in the run position. Let's try the starting fluid. Try it one more time. That fuel's just not making it through the carburetor. We got to take that off and take it apart. These are T25 Torx screws. It's kind of stuck to this paper gasket in the back, and the linkage from the throttle cable, I got to turn it sideways to get it off of that. Got the fuel lines off, and I want to try to pump out the fuel that is in the carburetor just to make it less of a mess when I take it apart. Within the carburetor, like I mentioned before, the diaphragm has probably hardened up because this blower's been sitting for a long time. Maybe some of the passageways within the carburetor, maybe they are clogged up, gummed up with old fuel, but we will take it apart and see. Let's get this bulb off first. Phillips head screws. I thought I was just taking the bulb off, but you can see how long these screws are. I think that's all that holds the whole carburetor together, and that is. Here's the diaphragm and gasket I was talking about. This has hardened up. Hear that? This should be flexible. So I need a number off this carburetor. I do see Walbro right here, W-A-L-B-R-O, and I believe that's it right there, 247A. Let me research and order some parts, and I'll be back probably in about a week. Carburetor kit is on the way, so while I'm waiting, I just want to get all this cleaned up with carb spray. And I have the needle valve taken out because that kit comes with a new needle valve. And that kit comes with a new screen also, but this one looks pretty clean. The new kit is here. It's a genuine Walbro Carburetor Kit K21-WYA, and I managed to separate all of the pieces so that I can match up the pieces that I have before I cut the package open. So the diaphragm matches up, this metering wheel matches up, this gasket matches up. I'm going to try to get that needle valve in first, and I've only done this once or twice and it was a pain in the butt each time, and this I'm sure is going to be the same, but you can see I have the spring in place. I'm holding the piece with the pin and the needle valve hanging on the end, and I have to put this in place and also compress that spring at the same time, and the needle valve just fell off. And there's a definite skill to this, which is a skill that I do not possess. And that might be in the right position. I know I'm blocking you with my finger, but only so much I can do. The set screw I have on a magnetic screwdriver, I would suggest you do the same. I'm going to lock it down. Hopefully that spring's in the right position. If it is, I'm good. And it is. That's the easiest that I've ever done that, because you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different pieces, all separate pieces that you have to get back in there in the right order. Hopefully that showed you a way that you might be able to do it. Now this new metering device goes over where the needle and valve are, with the metal side down, with the wheel side down, and a primer bulb on top of that. And now on this piece, diaphragm goes down first. Oh, wait a minute. I'm forgetting the spring. Spring goes first right there. Then the diaphragm. And there are 2 pins right here on the metal that are going to come up through those holes in the diaphragm. And then the gasket on top of that. So you have to line all that up and keep the spring in position underneath, which is not easy to do. And now this piece with the primer bulb. And that looks right, so I'm going to put some screws in. Alright. Put this back on, hook everything up, and see if she runs. So throttle cable back on, and the 2 bolts back in. And now the 2 fuel lines, and on this one, the return line was the one farthest away from the bulb. Everything's back together. Let me take it outside and see if it'll fire up. Hopefully it will. Primer bulb is working. Fuel is coming in through the intake, out through the return. Choke is on. Here we go. Hey. Woohoo! Alright, success with the carburetor, but there's a problem in the handle. There's a problem with this throttle switch. I found the problem, and it is not with the handle. The throttle cable came loose from the carburetor. So I've got to get this back in that hole and make sure it's in correctly this time. So that's all it was. It was my mistake. I didn't have that in correctly the first time. So let me crank it up and I should be able to control the throttle. And before I crank it up, I rigged up a temporary air filter with a piece of polyfoam and a couple of rubber bands.